then in 1989, The Simpsons aired. After previously airing on The Tracy Ullman Show since 1987.
Can we just watch some early Simpsons for the rest of this episode?
Yeah.
Well, I figure we got about 7 minutes left if you two want to just let us know all the quotes.
No, it was a super short season. It was 13 episodes. I mean, James Brooks had worked with Matt Groening to do the Tracy Ullman shorts, and they wanted to do a full-length, TV episode season. And a lot of people didn't have faith in it. They wanted to do shorter segments, like let's do, 3 or 4, 6 or 7 minute bits, and they pushed really hard to make a whole
on
episode.
at prime time, too. Like that was outrageous back then,
Yeah, and a cartoon where the animation style wasn't, super rubbery. Like it's cartoon, it's cartoonish, but it's a very realistic cartoon when you think about the way that the world works for those guys, and that was new for cartoons back then.
And also a cartoon that introduced so many characters, right? You had so many characters in the Simpsons world, and that was actually one of the things that really drew me to that, because it felt more like a real world, like as you really experience, than just a sitcom where you see the same 8 characters over and over. It also wasn't a family that loved each other all the time. They had their issues. They had their problems. The dad would strangle the son every once in a while. I mean, that stuff happened. It was real.
But in the first season, like I think a lot of people push their memory back onto that first season. In the first season, Homer actually wasn't like the oafish kind of mad buffoon that he was. He was a little more intellectual.
Dumb, but
Lisa
like
was kind of
dad.
a troublemaker, right? Yeah. And he was a little out of touch, but he wasn't a bad father necessarily.
I think it was really important for Fox as a network too. Like I think it sort of
was their
defined
first
this,
hit.
Yeah, it defined them as
Yeah.
a new player basically. And I think it in the way you were talking about the genesis and the attitude with it, right? Like that was a really interesting. I think '89 is a really interesting year because it's we can buck traditions and we can be a little edgier, and I think that is what Fox was, and that's what The Simpsons was.
Yeah.
For me, it was the first show that I started recording regularly on VHS tape. So I was the keeper of the tapes among our friends.
Pause for the commercials.
Oh yeah, no, I would I'd pause for the commercials. I would sit there and watch it, but I would make sure that I had, unfortunately everything was in that long play, so 6 hours of episodes on a tape, so the quality wasn't that great. But I had 20 tapes, over a few years, and my friends we would either watch them when we got home from work or from school, or people would borrow them and they would, copy my tapes. But this is in the days before Netflix or before The Simpsons was even syndicated. Mm-hmm. So once an episode went up, you couldn't watch it again.
Yeah.
If we both had to work that night, it was like, wow, you have to program the VCR, and who knows if it's going to work or not. Yeah. And then you got the stupid commercials, and it was the worst.
Yep. Sometimes I would actually go through and hook 2 VCRs up and cut the commercials out and do a master tape too. That's how dedicated I was to The Simpsons, man. We had them all in order.
Okay, so you didn't bring Girls Home.
Right. No, you mentioned getting off work, and I think the reason we remember that show so much is everybody hung out at our house, and whoever was home would watch it when it was on, and then somebody got off work and came over, and they were like, let's watch The Simpsons. And then the next person who got off work came over, and by the end of the night, if you were there at the start, you would watch that episode 5 or 6 times, and it's sort of burned into your brain. One thing I will say, though, about the family thing, it was kind of controversial, right? There was a lot of parents groups who were upset about it. There were a lot of schools who outlawed the merchandise.
Right.
It's you couldn't wear Bart Simpson shirts because he had this very rebellious, anti-establishment attitude.
Underachiever.
Yeah, it's the whole eat my shorts, down with homework and all that stuff. Authority figures took that really seriously and tried to crack down on the show. But other people, fans of the show, said, no, actually, this is a loving family. They're tuned into each other, even if they're a little dysfunctional. At least they're paying attention to each other's lives. And I remember that was a really strong debate among school officials and things like that at the time.
It's so interesting that it's on now and it's come so far. Obviously, in a lot of ways, it's worse.
Is it still on? I didn't know that. Is it still running?
Yeah, it's crazy. I don't know. It's really interesting to me, that legacy.
Yeah.
I don't think back then you would have been oh, this is gonna be on for 20. I will have a family by the time this is still airing. I don't know. I can't imagine anyone expected that at the time.
I like to think that it's not just nostalgia. I like to think that the first 8 seasons were actually better, but I'm not sure. I don't really watch The Simpsons anymore because
no, they were better.
I fell out of favor with them because they just weren't as funny as they used to be. They used to have The Simpsons used to be structured where they had 3 or 4 little vignettes that went on. There was one continuous line and then these little mini stories in. So it was a lot. It was great writing and it was a lot to keep track of, as opposed to, again, your normal sitcom, which is just kind of this base writing and very easy to follow. We literally had a secret language with Simpson quotes where Steve and I and a lot of our friends could talk to each other just with Simpsons quotes.
We still do that here in the office. Yeah. There are plenty of Simpsons fans, and that we talk a lot in those terms.
Dan Stapleton has the entire series memorized, apparently, because he knows all of them.
There was a situation that the Simpsons hadn't already covered in the shows that you couldn't use a quote from. So yeah, I mean, it was just such a big influence on my life.
I will say one thing that's really interesting, going back to look at the notes for the show, is even in that first episode, you know, there's Skinner, there's Mr. Burns, like all the people that you think of. Moe's in there, Barney's in there, and then in the first season you add in, you know, Smithers and Milhouse, and like all the people you think of as like core to the series.
Yeah,
they were
they're there.
right there from the beginning, and many of them in that very first Christmas episode, which was only the premiere because the one they wanted to premiere with came back with such terrible animation from overseas that they had to send it back. They were on the verge of canceling the show because they thought this won't ever work. But they had a big argument with the animation company, and they came back with an improved version. And they convinced Fox to let them delay till Simpsons Roasting on an Open Fire, which was the very first time we saw a 22-minute long Simpsons episode.
Santa's Little Helper.
Yeah.
Still running today. It's the longest running American sitcom, and of course led to South Park, Family Guy, King of the Hill, Futurama, The Critic, all these other.
And I mean, in some ways, even like Parks and Rec got like heavily inspired by The Simpsons, like in terms of that ensemble.